Yeah, I hope you can all hear me. I'd like to begin by uh, thanking
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to begin by thanking the organizers for inviting me to this program on understanding the universe through neutrinos. I would have very much loved to be there in person. In fact, I had tickets booked, etc. Especially because, understanding the universe through neutrinos is something that I've tried to do most of my career. So it seems apt that I should be there. But what has happened is that I was traveling for work for the last 1 month, and ever since I was back 2 days ago, I've had a continuous fever. So there you have an excuse also in case my talk sounds like a fever dream. Um, what I'm going to do is in this talk, I'm going to present to you neutrino astronomy within the context of multi-messenger astronomy. That is, till about 400 years ago, we had to really view the sky with just our naked eyes. But around 400 years ago, we learned how to make the telescope. And this allowed us to view the sky even deeper, but in the same narrow spectrum of photons, which we know as between 400 to 700 nanometers today. And just the process of inventing telescopes to get a deeper view of the universe kicked off something we now know as the Copernican revolution. And the birth of much of modern science is indirectly attributed to it. In the last 100 years or so, we have been able to go to much lower wavelengths and also higher wavelengths. Higher energies, where we have seen the non-thermal universe going to X-ray and gamma rays, and also lower energies, where at energies such as radio and microwave, we have seen many sources, but also in the microwave, we have seen the cosmic microwave background, etc. Around for the last 100 years or so, we have also known that there are charged particles at very high energies, up to 10 to the power 20 electron volts and higher. In fact, 10 to the power 21 to 22 electron volts, and as low as 10 to the power 8 electron volts. These are coming in from outer space, but because they're charged, we cannot, point back to where they come from, because there are magnetic fields in outer space, and so they're deflected. And we only know how much energy is there in cosmic rays and what their flux and composition, etc. are. We don't really know what their sources are in any direct way. But people have been able to form hypotheses based on energetics, etc. Now, in the last 10 years, which is roughly the period between when I started my PhD, which is in 2012, and now, what has happened is we have gotten two new messengers. One is gravitational waves, which began in 2015 also with the LIGO collaboration reporting their first detection of a gravitational wave from a black hole merger. I will not talk much more about this, but I just want to point out that the birth of neutrino astronomy has happened almost simultaneously in time with the birth of gravitational wave astronomy. And so neutrino astronomy was primarily started out by IceCube. It is an experiment that I have been involved with since 2012 when I began my PhD. The detector what has happened is that IceCube has managed to detect a diffuse flux of astrophysical neutrinos. That is, we know there are astrophysical neutrinos above 50 TeV coming from different directions in the sky. It is more or less compatible with the idea that it's isotropic. But we have been able to identify only a few candidate sources for these neutrinos so far. So neutrino astronomy, because it's literally the first decade, is very much in its infancy. And I would emphasize from a very early stage of this talk that the way we analyze and interpret information from neutrinos, that is data as obtained by IceCube, cannot really be abstracted away from the other types of astronomy. So neutrino astronomy is in some sense very much multi-messenger astronomy. It is at the core of it. So this, of course, raises the question, why do we want to see the universe in so many different messengers? And at high energies, which is where we are interested in, as you'll see, because once you get to IceCube, IceCube is sensitive at high energies. The universe is more or less opaque to both photons and cosmic rays. So, for example, if you were to look at an energy of 1 peta-electron volt also, so 1 PeV, the distance to which you can see out in the universe in photons is about 100 kiloparsecs, or less than that actually, maybe a 10 kiloparsecs, which is roughly the distance to the center of our own galaxy. So we cannot really see far out into the universe using PeV photons. At lower energies, of course, the universe is fully transparent to photons, and this is why we have been able to do optical and radio astronomy and see deep into the universe and do cosmology with it, etc. And at higher energies, the photon scattering cross section reduces further, and the universe begins to be transparent again, in the sense that we can see out to about 100 megaparsecs or so around us. That's about 300 million light years. But photons in general at high energies do not give us a full picture of the universe. Similarly, if you were to look at charged particles, which, as I said, have the added disadvantage that they cannot point back to their sources, they also interact with the cosmic microwave background. And this interaction suppresses the distance they can propagate on average, and they do not propagate more than 100 megaparsecs at the highest of energies. This is known as the Greisen-Zatsepin-Kuzmin limit. And this is because at the highest of energies, the cross-section is enhanced because the delta plus resonance becomes kinematically accessible. So these are the disadvantages. The cosmic rays cannot point back, and they do not travel too far in the universe. Gamma rays do not travel too far at high energies. On the other hand, the neutrino, you will see that there is no curve corresponding to neutrinos in this plot. That's because the universe is fully transparent to neutrinos because they interact very weakly. In fact, they interact only according to the standard model weak interactions to the extent of our knowledge. And this means that they can travel for undeflected for very large distances in the universe. And like photons, they can point back. So you can do astronomy with neutrinos. Unlike photons, they interact only weakly, which means that while we are able to build gamma ray telescopes and optical telescopes that are somewhat small, you need a huge detector like IceCube to be able to detect neutrinos in sufficient numbers as to be able to do astronomy with them. And what we hope to see with neutrinos are the sites of cosmic ray acceleration. And so in the last decade, like I said, 2 new messengers in the form of gamma rays and neutrinos have come online. And the other thing is that all of these observatories have started talking to each other sort of in real time. So in 2012, when I began my PhD, if you wanted to use gamma ray flux or spectrum from a source or its morphology as an input for a neutrino analysis, you would have to digitize a plot that you take from one of the gamma ray observatory papers, and then you use that as a template in your neutrino analysis and so on. But by 2016, 2017, thanks to also work from my own part, what has happened was IceCube at least started sending out information in real time to other observatories. Every time we saw an event that we thought was promising from an astronomical point of view. And so we got response times as low as a few tens of seconds between when our detector is triggered and we send out alerts. And so other observatories started being able to follow up in response to our alerts in near real time, and also carry out accelerated analyses looking for correlation. Similarly, IceCube set up pipelines for accelerated data analyses in response to alerts from gravitational wave observatories, etc. So the latency, if you think of this as a network, or the response time has reduced radically thanks to the fact that we have used automated data pipelines to make all of these detectors talk to each other. So the first decade of multi-messenger astronomy has already immediately seen the birth of real-time multi-messenger astronomy. That is so all of this happened with IceCube, and you're not going to understand without understanding how IceCube functions. Ice cube is, basically speaking, 1 cubic kilometer of ice that is situated between 1.4 and 2.8 kilometers of depth at the South Pole. So this is naturally occurring ice, which is built up over hundreds of thousands of years there. What we have done is we have drilled holes into it using hot water jets. So when I say we, I was not involved in this process. I joined the collaboration in 2012 when the detector had just finished construction. So the detector was constructed between 2005 and 2011. And what was done was you drill these holes using hot water jets and you lower pressure vessels. So you can see in the distance along this cable a pressure vessel here. And what the pressure vessel contains is a single photomultiplier tube that points downwards. And why it points downwards will become clear a little further into this talk, as well as onboard digitization electronics such as fast analog to digital converters and analog transient waveform generators, and also programmable digital electronics, which allows each of these digital optical modules to behave like a computer. And so we have 5,160 of these modules embedded within the ice. They are embedded along 86 strings. Each string is a cable with 60 of these digital optical modules on board at somewhat evenly distributed in distance, and then you have lowered it deep into the ice. And so the threshold of the event, or the threshold energy above which ice cube is able to see a neutrino, is determined by how closely spaced these digital optical modules are along a string, and how closely spaced the strings are within the ice. And we have something called the principal ice cube array, which is basically this whole volume, which has a threshold of about 100 GeV in the energy of neutrinos it is sensitive to and can reconstruct. But towards the center of ice cube, we have a region called deep core, where we have used photomultiplier tubes with a higher quantum efficiency, and also they are placed much closer together on each string, within the separation between digital optical modules along a string within the deep core region is only about 7 meters, whereas in the rest of the detector it's about 17 meters. And the inter-string separation is about 70 meters in the rest of the detector, whereas at the center it has been reduced to about 15 meters or so. And because of this, at the center of the detector, this deep core region has a threshold of about 10 GeV. So it is an order of magnitude lower. So basically, ice cube is a cubic kilometer array that is sensitive to neutrinos above 100 GeV. But at its center, the deeper part of it is a smaller detector that is more densely instrumented, which is sensitive to neutrinos about 10 GeV. And how ice cube detects neutrinos is by detecting the Cherenkov radiation produced when neutrinos interact in ice. So neutrinos interact in ice and they produce, before we get to that, I would say that the ice, being a transparent medium which allows for the transmission of photons through it, is basically the most important part of our detector. And because it is a naturally occurring medium, we did not get to create this ice. It has all sorts of complexities. So this is the effective scattering length, absorption length on top and scattering length at the bottom. And what you can see is that the ice in general becomes more transparent as you go deeper into the detector. So at the lowest end of the detector, the absorption length is of the order of 200 meters or so. That is, on average, a photon travels 200 meters before it is absorbed. While the scattering length is about 50 meters or so. That is, on average, a photon travels about 50 meters before it gets scattered. Whereas at the higher end of the detector, that is the top part of the detector, you can see that the optical properties are much worse. And there is this periodic structure you see, and this is because the ice was formed in layers over different climate cycles of the Earth. And so various geological information is encoded within the optical properties of the ice. How we have measured this is each of these digital optical modules have LEDs which flash, and once a day or so for 10 minutes, we flash these LEDs and we record the arrival times of photons in nearby digital optical modules. And then we fit it to a model that describes how photons of different colors for which we have different LEDs are propagating through the ice. And right in the middle of the detector, at about 2000-meter depth, so about 600-meter depth within the detector, you will see there is a region of very poor optical properties. Both the absorption and the scattering are very bad here. Absorption length is of the order of 20 meters and scattering length is of the order of 5 meters. And that is because of a layer of dust. This is a layer of dust that we believe was dumped into the ice during a period of volcanic activity, maybe 60 to 70,000 years ago, which may have also coincided with a mass extinction and a human population bottleneck, etc. But during this period, due to warming, the ice would have melted and a large amount of dust from volcanic activity was dumped into the ice. So we have a dust layer right in the middle of our detector, which has poor optical properties. And these were all things we realized only after the detector was in some sense constructed, because we learned a lot about the ice by studying the propagation of photons in ice during our calibration runs. Now, this brings us to the question, why was IceCube built at all? Why are people interested in trying to do astronomy with neutrinos? And that is really the question of cosmic rays. Like I said, because they're charged, we cannot really, and there are magnetic fields in space, we cannot really tell where they come from by looking at their direction. But for almost a century, we have had the idea that the energy required to sustain the total cosmic ray flux within the galaxy over almost 12 orders of magnitude in energy is just a small fraction of the energy that is being put out by the occasional supernova explosion within the galaxy or so. And this has led to the belief that at least the part of the cosmic ray spectrum that is believed to be of galactic origin probably has supernovae as leading contributors to the cosmic ray flux, or supernova remnants, that is what is left over after a supernova explodes, which nevertheless is able to continuously accelerate cosmic rays through mechanisms that Fermi proposed a long time ago. And at the highest of energies, we believe nothing within our galaxy is able to accelerate cosmic rays to those energies. So we believe these energies, it must be originating outside the galaxy. And there is no direct evidence for any of these hypotheses. These are hypotheses based on looking and carefully accounting for the energy budget involved in cosmic rays. We would be able to confirm some of this using gamma ray observations, see if supernovae are actually good sites for acceleration of cosmic rays. But the issue is that gamma rays can also be produced by inverse Compton scattering and leptonic processes and so on. So they do not, interpreting gamma ray data is quite complicated. On the other hand, wherever cosmic rays are being accelerated, protons and heavier nuclei are being accelerated, they probably interact among themselves and also with the background photons there to produce charged pions, and those charged pions decay to neutrinos and also muons, which then further decay to neutrinos. So if we are able to see a source in neutrinos, that clearly would be a smoking gun signature for the acceleration of hadrons within that source. So in some sense, neutrinos have always been believed to be the key towards solving a century-old puzzle of where do cosmic rays come from. And this is why IceCube was built primarily, to search for neutrinos coming from cosmic ray interactions. So IceCube sees, IceCube relies on, like any other particle physics detector, something called a trigger to determine when the data should be saved to disk, because we cannot continuously save all the data in all our digital optical modules all the time. And the trigger condition is something like within a few microseconds, if a few DOMs, 3 or 8, depending upon whether it is within the deep core region or main IceCube region, sees more than one photoelectron within a few microsecond window, 3 or 8 nearby or next to nearby digital optical modules. Then you consider the detector to have been triggered and you read out all the photons or the state of all the PMTs within the detector within a trigger window of about 5 microseconds or so. And if you were to do that, you would see two types of signatures within IceCube. One is, so in this plot, what you see are each of these dots, black dots correspond to an IceCube DOM. It's a visualization. The size in that of each of these blobs correspond to how much charge was there. And the color corresponds to whether it was early, corresponding to red, or late, corresponding to blue within the trigger window. So if you look at this pattern of hits here, you can see that this is clearly what you would call a track. And a track originates because a high energy muon is traversing the detector. If on the other hand, some of the trigger windows you look at, you will not see a clear track-like signature. You will see a big blob of hits, which originates in either the charge current interactions of electron and tau neutrinos, or the neutral current interactions of all flavors of neutrinos. So these are the two kinds of signatures we see. The vast majority of events seen in IceCube look either like this or like this. Now, the advantage of the muon or the track signature is that if you see it as going in the upgoing direction, you know that it could have been only due to the charge current interaction of a muon neutrino. More importantly, you can reconstruct the direction of the muon and then indirectly guess the direction of the incoming neutrino to about less than 1 degree. At the highest of energies, about 0.3 degree. So which is the sort of resolution you need to be able to start doing astronomy. Note that in optical astronomy, people are able, and radio astronomy, etc., people are able to see arc seconds, milli arc seconds, sometimes micro arc seconds in precision if you're doing it from space. This is, so an arc second is 1 by 3600 of a degree, whereas in neutrinos, we are talking about resolutions of slightly below a degree. So this is the sky as seen in neutrinos will always be a much blurrier thing than the sky as seen in photons, or at least in low energy photons. The advantage of a track channel is that you can have the interaction of the primary neutrino happening much outside the detector. All you need to do is detect the secondary muon, and then you have, in some sense, detected also a neutrino. Of course, you cannot reconstruct the energy of the primary neutrino. You only get an upper limit based on how much of the energy was deposited by the muon within your detector. But this effectively means that you have an you have an effective volume that is much larger than the instrumented volume. So even though the detector is 1 kilometer cube, if you're looking at track-like events, you have effective volumes as large as tens and hundreds of kilometer cube, because we don't need to essentially look at only interactions happening within the detector. But on the other hand, if it is a cascade and the cascade-like event is happening within a detector, then most of the energy is deposited within the detector, and the detector acts as a fully active calorimeter. So you have an energy resolution of up to like 20% or so, which means that you can use your detector as a calorimeter. But the disadvantage is that you can't really reconstruct the direction very well. The angular reconstruction above 50 TeV usually gives you an angular resolution of something like 15 degrees or so, but this has actually been rapidly improving. So if you model the eye's optical properties very well, in fact, it is believed that if you have perfect understanding of the optical properties of the eyes, we may be able to reconstruct cascades to a precision of 3 degrees or so. In the most recent analysis, what IceCube has been able to do is 8 degrees for the angular resolution. So cascades have much poorer angular resolution than tracks, but much better energy resolution. In both cases, we cannot tell neutrinos and antineutrinos apart. So the proposed India-based neutrino observatory, they had a plan to have a magnet in the detector to be able to make a muon track curve, and then you'd be able to tell muons and anti-muons apart, which would then allow you to tell neutrinos and anti-neutrinos apart. But IceCube does not have a magnetic field within a detector. We cannot afford to put a magnetic field within a detector that big, and where the medium is naturally occurring. So we can't really tell neutrinos and anti-neutrinos apart, except in one special case, which I'll tell you about later. So this is just another illustration of the Feynman diagrams that produce these signatures. This is a track, and this is a charge current interaction of a muon neutrino, where this lepton is a muon, outgoing lepton is a muon. All other interactions, charge current interactions of the other two flavors, as well as neutral current interactions of all three flavors, produce these kind of structures, or this kind of a pattern of hits within the detector. So if you were to take the number of triggered events, keep only track-like events, and you were to make a distribution of their directions, more specifically their zenith angle, then you would see a distribution that looks like this. And that is in the upgoing direction when you're standing at the South Pole, which in this figure would be the downgoing direction. You will see only a few events at the rate of maybe 1 every 4 to 7 minutes or so. And these track-like events are clearly muons originating in interactions of atmospheric muon neutrinos, charge current interactions of atmospheric muon neutrinos. On the other hand, in the downgoing direction, which in this figure is upgoing, because if the downgoing direction, if you're sitting at the South Pole, you see a 6 order of magnitude larger flux of muons. And these muons are actually produced directly in the upper atmosphere, in cosmic ray interactions in the upper atmosphere. So you have two types of atmospheric backgrounds, which are neutrinos produced in interactions of cosmic rays in the upper atmosphere, which then traverse the Earth, which go through the Earth and interact near the detector to produce track-like events. And then you have muons, which are directly produced in these interactions, which in the downgoing direction is 6 orders of magnitude larger in flux. And then we have what we believe are neutrinos coming directly from outer space. We see maybe something like 10 of them every year. And so it's really finding this was really a neutrino in a haystack problem. And we did this in 2013 by using the outermost layer of the detector as a V2. So what was done was, as people may have explained to you, just like the flux of cosmic rays, the flux of neutrinos is also a power law. Atmospheric neutrinos have a much steeper power law, that is e raised to minus 3.7 or so. As you go to higher and higher energies, you have fewer and fewer atmospheric neutrinos. Astrophysical neutrinos were believed to have a harder power law of about e raised to minus 2. So at the highest of energies, you would have the relative number of astrophysical neutrinos versus atmospheric neutrinos being biased towards more astrophysical neutrinos. And so you take the total amount of charge that is deposited within the detector, and you select only the events that deposited more than 6,000 photoelectrons within the detector, but within the outermost layer of the detector, which you define as a veto, you insist on that within that same trigger window, the least amount of charge was detected. So these set of events on this corner that you see here are the events of interest. And once you look at only those events, and we saw a clear excess of events that we believe to be of astrophysical origin. So this was an analysis whose results were published and was on the cover of the Science journal in 2013. And this is an illustration of this exact same analysis, but which is with more years of data. So this is now up to date. And what you can see is that the background of atmospheric muons, atmospheric neutrinos, etc., add up only to here, whereas the total event rate we see is given by these these data points. And to explain them, you need to include a component of neutrinos that are originating directly in outer space. These are called astrophysical neutrinos. And similarly, if you look at a distribution of their arrival directions or the zenith of their arrival directions, you can clearly see that, the atmospheric components of conventional neutrinos and muons just do not explain the data. You need this additional astrophysical component to do it. What you see here is the fact that the highest of energies, the Earth becomes opaque to neutrinos. So about 200 TeV or so, the interaction length of neutrinos within Earth starts being of the same order of magnitude as the radius of the Earth, and this means that the Earth starts being opaque to neutrinos. So there is a suppression. But in the downgoing direction, the Earth is, of course, fully, I mean, we are sensitive. But in the downgoing direction, of course, you have the muons, which are very hard to suppress as a background. But by using the veto technique, we were able to suppress it and discover these events within our high energy starting event sample at so today, or at least in the 7.5 year sample, which was made public maybe 3 years ago, you will see about 60 events, about 60 TeV, which we believe are of astrophysical origin. However, if you make a sky map of the arrival directions of all of these events, you don't see any obvious statistically significant clustering. This is because at least 3 out of 4 of these events are cascades, and only 1 out of 4 of those events are tracks. The tracks have good resolution, but the cascades don't. And if you try to look for statistically significant clustering, you don't get any evidence of a significant cluster. You may think that here this is a hotspot, so we've seen a source, but we have basically maximized the likelihood at every point in the sky. And because you're doing that, you need to account for the look elsewhere effect of looking at every point in the sky. And once you account for that, all of these are basically statistically marginal. None of them are at the threshold where you can say, oh, I believe there is a source there. The evidence for an astrophysical flux of neutrinos has subsequently been confirmed also in other non-overlapping channels of ice cube. That is, if you don't use a veto and you look at only track-like events which are going in the upward direction when you're standing at the South Pole, which then has to only be neutrinos because muons will not traverse the whole Earth and reach there. They will range out. There also at the highest of energies, we see a component within our data that cannot be explained by the atmospheric components alone, which means that we have had to conclude that there are astrophysical neutrinos at TeV energies, tens to hundreds of TeV, or TeV to PeV energies, which you can see in each of these individual data sets. So we have independent confirmations from multiple non-overlapping channels. This is the high energy starting events. This is the through-going tracks I presented in the previous slide, but also cascades without involving any containment. They all have independent evidence, now each of them at more than 6 sigma for the existence of an astrophysical flux of neutrinos. And so this is the normalization of the flux, and this is the spectral index of the flux, and different channels are all broadly statistically compatible with each other. And you see a flux that is somewhere between e raised to -2 and e raised to -3. So it is not as steeply falling off as the atmospheric neutrino spectrum, but it may be more steeper than the cosmic ray spectrum that you'd measure. Now, I mentioned that we couldn't find any sources by looking for statistically significant clustering. And so one of the things we decided back in 2015 or so is that we should alert the community as soon as possible the moment we see an event of interest that we believe is of astrophysical origin. This involved a significant number of challenges when we first made the decision to do this. we just to reconstruct the direction of one of these track-like astrophysical neutrino events would have taken 4 hours at least. But then we introduced online pipelines using splines, etc., to allow us to make a coarser estimate of the direction. And as a result, we were really able to speed up the process to such an extent that if the detector sees an event, we are able to have a first estimate of its direction and via satellite send it out to a bunch of networks, such as the Astrophysical Multi-Messenger Observatory Network, also these things called Astronomers Telegram, Gamma Ray Coordination Network, within 1 minute or so. In fact, for some events, we have managed to do it within 17 seconds. That is how low a latency we have between our detector being triggered and we informing the rest of the community. And this has been enormously useful because unlike most other telescopes, IceCube is a 4-pi detector. So if you take an optical telescope or many of the gamma ray telescope, you'll notice that they can only see a small region of the sky, which you have to point the instrument in. IceCube, on the other hand, is because the Earth is more or less transparent to neutrinos over a wide range of energies. IceCube is like the eye of Sauron. It sees through everything, and across the entire 4-pi solid angle, it has some sensitivity. And so it's not a detector that you point in one direction or anything. It's just a block of ice which is able to reconstruct neutrinos coming from all directions. So the fact that we've been able to send alerts means the rest of the community has been able to respond in time. And so when we first started sending out public alerts, for the first 9 alerts, we just sent out alerts and nothing really interesting happened. It was, I was starting to wonder if there is a point to this. But then on the 10th alert we sent out, within a few days, we got a bunch of astronomers, telegrams, gamma ray coordinate networks, circulars, etc., from other experiments, pointing out that they also see interesting things in the same direction. And this was on September 22nd, 2017, while I was a postdoc at the Niels Bohr Institute. A muon track event, which was created by a 290 TeV neutrino, was IceCube itself. The moment we reconstruct the direction, we realized it was compatible with the direction of a known blazar, which is now known as the Texas source, but it is TXS 0506 plus 056. And within 2 days, MAGIC, the ground-based imaging atmospheric Cherenkov telescope in La Palma, as well as Fermi, put out alerts telling us that they found this blazar, TXS 0506 plus 056, to be in a flaring state. That is, it is producing more high-energy photons than normal. This allowed us, so these are the contours, the reconstructed contour at 90% confidence level of the IceCube event is shown here in red. The one by MAGIC is shown in green, and you can clearly see my statement about how neutrinos are not as good at angular resolution as high energy gamma rays or photons. Here, the neutrino contour is much larger than the gamma ray contours, but you can see that they all overlap, and where they are in the sky can be determined with respect to this constellation, which I believe is called Orion. It's below the arm of the Hunter, and this 290 TeV neutrino was found to be coincident with it. Now, of course, we have, at the time this happened, we had no idea whether this could have just been by chance. And we had to carry out a somewhat very complicated analysis to figure out whether that is by chance. The way we did that was we looked at all possible blazars from Fermilab catalogs. We took monthly bins of light curves above 1 GeV. We tried to find which of them would be flaring at the same time as an alert sent out by IceCube. We also took into account all the previous alert that we send, as well as events that occurred within the detector, which would have generated alerts had the alert system been operational. And we accounted for the look elsewhere effect associated with all of this in a maximum likelihood analysis. It turns out this correlation that we see between this event and the TXS source is only at the 3 sigma level. So it's not the kind of evidence that collider physicists who can do repeatable experiments would get very excited about, which is that they need 5 sigma threshold to actually believe that something is real. We call this evidence. We do not call it a discovery because it is not 5 sigma, it is 3 sigma. But motivated by the fact that we believe this source is somewhat special because of a correlation with this event, we actually took our archival data and looked at that direction in past data, and we also found a statistically significant clustering in neutrinos during a previous period in the year 2015. That is, or between September 2014 and September 2015, and that alone is also a 3.5 sigma excess over the expected background. However, this flare did not, to the extent of our knowledge, have any gamma ray flare associated with it. So it is essentially 2 separate hypotheses for the signal that we have. One in which the null hypothesis that there is only background is rejected at 3 sigma, and the other one in which the null hypothesis is rejected at 3.5 sigma. You cannot combine these 2 hypotheses, but the fact that you have 2 separate about 3 sigma observations made us strongly believe that we have observed the first extragalactic source of astrophysical neutrinos. And because of our alert and the excitement it generated, optical astronomers pointed a spectrograph at it and measured the redshift and so on. And it was found to be at a very high redshift of 0.33, which immediately raised the question, why is the first extragalactic source of neutrinos we are seeing so far away in the universe? Because this is a blazar. A blazar is an active galactic nucleus in which the jet is the jet is pointing along the line of sight. We see hundreds of such blazars at shorter distances, that is in the more nearby universe within 100 megaparsecs or so. So the fact that the first one to produce neutrinos was about 4 billion light years away was found to be very curious, and we did not really understand that. But we continued sending out alerts and doing more analysis, and today we have seen also more nearby sources. So this is not as puzzling as we first thought. So thanks to the advent of neutrino astronomy, now we have something called, this is basically the multi-messenger equivalent of a spectral energy distribution. So you have all the spectral energy distribution information in photons, and on top of that you have the information also in neutrinos included within one plot. This is for the source I just mentioned in the previous slide, the TXS0506 source. Now, the way IceCube was always envisioned to look for neutrino point sources was very different from this real-time multi-messenger coincidence alert system and the science that it kicked off. It was to the plan always was to just isolate a large number of tracks, which then in the southern sky, which consists of upgoing events when you're standing at the South Pole, would be the northern sky, which consists of upgoing events when you're standing at the South Pole, would be mostly atmospheric neutrinos, but in the southern sky, which consists of downgoing events, would be atmospheric muons. But both atmospheric neutrinos and muons are expected to be uniformly distributed within a declination band. They are not expected to cluster across time and in direction. So if you find a high energy a statistically significant directional cluster of higher energy events, then that would have been the cleanest way of detecting a point source of neutrinos. The objective of this sort of an analysis is to bury the signal, to find the signal that's buried here. So the analysis I mentioned earlier found the highest energy events, but by looking at clustering of lower energy track-like events, you can also find astrophysical neutrinos that are buried here. We carried out analysis like this with 10 years of IceCube data. wherein we look for a point source at every point in the sky on a 0.1 degree by 0.1 degree grid. And those of you who understand p-values may be under the impression that we have found a really hot spot in the northern sky and another hot spot in the southern sky with very small p-values. But we need to account for the look elsewhere effect associated with the fact that we are looking at a large number of points across the sky. And once you do that, once you look for the hottest spot in the sky in many Campbell sky map, then the p-values are much less significant. They are of the order of 0.1 and 0.75 respectively in the northern and southern skies. So this analysis, which is in some sense the simplest point source analysis of IceCube, had, at least in its all sky point source search, wherein you blindly look for neutrino point sources everywhere in the sky without taking into account any information from other messages, has not been able to identify any neutrino source so far. But if you look in the direction of known promising sources, so we had a catalog of about 110 gamma ray sources that were identified based on the fact that they emit TeV and GeV photons. And we believe those photons to be originating from pion decay. And if wherever there are neutral pions decaying, there are probably charged pions decaying too. And so we believe there should also be neutrinos coming from these directions. So if we just look in those 110 directions in the sky, then we actually saw a source, NGC 1068. Because the look elsewhere effect is much smaller, the post-trial significance of the source was about 4 sigma. So it's still not at the 5 sigma threshold where I can start confidently telling you it is a source. So I would call all of these candidate sources. But the basic idea is that because we are using information from gamma rays to look in the direction of promising sources, we are now able to more confidently say from a statistical point of view that there is an excess of events from the direction of this known source. So once again, the emphasis is that neutrino astronomy currently does not stand on its own. We are able to do astronomy with neutrinos only by factoring in information from also other messengers. So this has, of course, brought about, I would say, what a field that I would call multi-messenger phenomenology, which is you have the measured neutrino flux for these sources in terms of these bands that are shown here. But you will also see that there are curves that overlap with it. And these curves are somewhat what I'd call theoretical or modeling predictions. You can check out some of these papers by Murase or Reno to get an idea of how it's done. And they are essentially currently spherical chickens in a vacuum. So you have some oversimplified plasma physics model of a single zone region where you have cosmic rays being accelerated, and then you try to calculate how many neutrinos you expect from there corresponding to a measured gamma ray flux or so. This modeling is very post facto, and it doesn't really right now make any reliable predictions, etc. There are far too many parameters to fit the data, and then it's questionable whether such parameters are physically meaningful. In particular, for the source I mentioned earlier, this NGC 1068, the MAGIC collaboration had looked at the source, looked at the gamma ray flux from it, and based on the logic that wherever you have gamma rays being produced from hadronic processes, you should also have neutrinos, and the relative number can be estimated by looking at the relative production of neutral and charged pions. Neutral and charged pions respectively. They had set an upper limit on the neutrino flux of the source, which turned out to be wrong by a factor of 100. That is, they predicted that the neutrino flux from the source would be a factor of 100 smaller than what we eventually measured it to be. And so in order to explain this discrepancy, what is now accepted is that NGC 1068 is a dust obscured blazar. That is, the gamma rays from the source are being absorbed by a large amount of dust along our line of sight that exists between the source and us. And because of the obscuration by the dust, the gamma ray flux is suppressed by a factor of 100. And this is why the source is 100 times brighter in neutrinos than you would expect with gamma rays, because the neutrinos are not attenuated by the dust. So this is the kind of modeling choices that people make when they're trying to build models of neutrino sources. I think the field has a long way to go. We have recently also seen our own galaxy in neutrinos. So you can take the Fermi Gamma Ray Observatory's map of high energy gamma rays. You can decompose it into one that is due to what you believe is due to neutral pion decay, and as well as other components like inverse Compton scattering, etc. And the neutral pion decay component will then allow you to predict a neutrino component because of the corresponding prediction of charge pions. And this is the prediction of what you would expect. And this is what we saw in data in an analysis that used convolutional neural networks to reconstruct cascades to a precision of about 7 degrees or so. So this is so far the best angular resolution we have obtained for cascades of around 7 degrees. And we look in a sample dominated by cascades, you see a clear axis from the direction of our own galaxy that is significant at the level of about 4.6 sigma. So again, it is not at the 5 sigma level. So this, once again, is the sky map of that analysis. And as you can see, there's a clear axis from the direction of our galaxy. And this is what we mean by we have seen our galaxy neutrinos. We have looked for coincidence between neutrinos and gravitational waves. And at least in the case of black hole mergers, they are not expected. For neutron star mergers, if the resulting jet happens to align with our line of sight, then we may have seen a few events. But the only neutron star merger event from which we saw gravitational waves and electromagnetic counterparts, we believe the jet was somewhere between 3 and 17 degrees off axis from us, from our line of sight. So we saw no neutrinos associated with it. And we have stringent upper limits on both the immediate aftermath of the merger and also in the subsequent period. We have also looked for anytime LIGO-Virgo collaboration tells us a gravitational wave event has happened, which then allows us to identify these banana-like regions in the sky where the gravitational wave is from. We can look within the same similar or promising nearby time window for all potential astrophysical neutrinos. And in each of these plots, which correspond to a separate gravitational wave event that LIGO-Virgo collaboration informed the world about, you can see these green points which corresponds to the neutrinos which happened within the same time. As you see, there is no overlap at all. So far we have not been able to see any correlation between neutrinos and gravitational waves. Ultra energy neutrinos and TeV, PeV neutrinos and gravitational waves. We have also not been able to see any correlation between neutrinos and ultra energy cosmic ray arrival directions. Now, you may wonder why look for it since cosmic rays are charged, but we understand the strength of the magnetic fields in extragalactic space and also in our own galaxy through Faraday rotation curve measurements. And according to this, at the highest of energies, at EeV energies, let's say 50 EeV or so, if you have a proton, then maybe the deflection we expect from the direction of the source is of the order of a few degrees. So maybe some kind of blurry astronomy can be done with ultra energy cosmic rays. But we looked for a correlation with neutrinos and we found nothing. And this is actually not surprising because, like I said, the Greisen-Zatsepin-Kuzmin process of the enhanced interaction of cosmic rays with the cosmic microwave background due to delta plus plus resonance being kinematically accessible above 50 EeV in proton energy. That essentially introduces a horizon of about 100 megaparsecs for how far cosmic rays can travel within the universe, whereas neutrinos have no such horizon because they're just weakly interacting. So all the new astrophysical neutrinos we see are from a much deeper universe than the ultra energy cosmic rays, which are from a much shallower universe. And the idea that the two could be correlated, maybe it is not to be expected, even though we are performing analysis looking for such correlations, because it would be surprising if such a correlation exists. So I see that I am approaching 1 hour of speaking time. I have a lot more slides on particle physics, on dark matter searches with neutrinos. But if since the time allotted to me is about 1 hour, uh, I will just skip ahead to what we want to do in the future. So the basic message is that some of the most enduring problems of the last century, such as dark matter, also can be probed using neutrinos. This was my PhD work. You can look for GeV neutrinos coming from the direction of the sun. And if they exist, then that means there are some dark matter particles trapped within the sun and they're annihilating. However, we have so far failed to detect any such neutrinos, and so all we have are upper limits on the properties of dark matter. Also, the same way gamma ray observatories look for dark matter, you can look for dark matter with neutrino observatories also by looking for neutrinos coming from like the galactic center and the halo of the galaxy and so on. And there again, we have no detections. All we have are upper limits. Because we have at more than 5 sigma a flux of neutrinos at TeV to PeV energies going through the Earth, we can also use that flux of neutrinos as a beam to study the property of neutrino interaction. So IceCube has measured the inelasticity distribution, that is, in each interaction, how much of the energy of the incoming neutrino goes to the outgoing lepton versus the rest of the hadronic debris, that distribution, and also the probability of interaction, which is the cross section. IceCube has been able to test and measure all of this to some extent, but so far everything we see is very much compatible with the standard model of particle physics. Nothing surprising has been seen. And in any case, because of astroparticle physics experiments cannot do repeatable experiments like they do at colliders, from a point of view of particle physics, even if we see something puzzling or new, we will need to eventually investigate that using ground-based neutrino beams, and that is the only way. The standard model also predicts some processes such as the Glashow resonance, which is the on-shell S-channel production of a W boson. However, for this to happen, you need an anti-electron neutrino of about 6 PeV because the W boson is very massive. And such a neutrino cannot be produced using any accelerator-based detector on Earth. This means that the only way we could confirm that the Glashow resonance, which is predicted by the standard model, actually exists is using the astrophysical flux of neutrinos. And IceCube saw this in 2018, and we published it in 2021. We can also look at the flavor ratios of astrophysical neutrinos, and they actually may contain some information about quantum gravity from an effective field theory perspective. So this is a recent paper you can check out. Of course, there are many nuances here, and I would say, if you were to ask me, I would say that it will take multiple decades of modeling in neutrino and observations in observations in neutrino and multi-messenger astronomy, and also modeling to be able to actually say if there are constraints on quantum gravity from astrophysical neutrinos. But there is a possibility of using astrophysical neutrinos to constrain quantum gravity. So with this, I'll just speak briefly about the future. IceCube is 1 cubic kilometer in size. It has been operating for 13 years now, and sensitivity will only improve with the square root of time as it progresses. So we don't expect any radically new physics to be produced by IceCube in the near future. But if you want to increase our sensitivity, see much fainter sources to resolve the sky neutrinos, in a manner of speaking, or to bring about the maturity of neutrino astronomy, we need a detector that is much larger. So you need an instrumented volume that is 10 times larger than IceCube. And the plan is to do that at a comparable cost to IceCube by just placing these detectors further apart in the ice. So this region you see in red is the existing IceCube. The proposed IceCube Gen 2 extension is the region you see in blue. And we will also, for the first time, use optical modules which contain more than one PMT. So multiple concepts are being evaluated. MDOMs may have up to 24 PMTs per optical module, which means that we also record the arrival direction of the photon within the eyes, and that may allow us to radically improve our ability to reconstruct the events. There is also proposals to have these sort of long optical modules, which have very small diameter and a large number of photomultiplier tubes inside. And the reason is that if you use optical modules like this, then the hole you need to make in the eyes is much narrower. Here you can see it's a 35 centimeter diameter, 36 centimeter diameter, whereas for LOM, all you have is 13 centimeter diameter. And a narrower hole is much cheaper to drill than a wide hole in the eyes. So since I joined TIFR 3 years ago, we have been members of the IceCube Gen 2 collaboration and part of the effort in building towards building IceCube Gen 2 detector. I have a postdoc and a student working on reconstruction algorithms and also design of the layout of the detector. The detector will also have a surface array wherein using scintillators, we sample the air showers directly at the surface. And if you are interested in the opportunity to contribute towards building this detector, please reach out to me. We are also looking towards building many of the components of the data acquisition system, including many of the cable assemblies within India with the help of Indian industry, if possible. Some of these inquiries are at an advanced stage. With that, I don't want to go any more over time. I will stop my talk. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Rameez. Thank you. So we can have a couple of quick questions.